Welcome to Rethink Community Podcast, brought to you by Think Tank, Inc. I'm your host, John White. For the last 10 years, Think Tank has been helping people and organizations step into the stories of those who face poverty every day. We believe that stories have the power to break through our opinions and positions and bring us together. On this podcast, we bring you real stories from real people who have grappled with poverty, faced obstacles, blazed new trails, and forged unlikely relationships. Every child who comes to school comes with a story, and those stories might be very different. Today on the podcast, we talk to Megan LeMaster, who works as a community liaison in a suburban school district. Rameka Nelson, who brings her own lived experience to bear on her work as a manager of a subsidized housing development in that district. Well, this is going to be another edition for Think Tank Podcast, and it's going to be a great one. We have two special guests. We talked to Megan LeMaster, and Megan is a community liaison in a suburban school district, and Rameka Nelson, who brings her own lived experience to bear on her work as a public housing development leader in that district, in the same district, and in a suburban district. So we have, it's going to be a very interesting 20 minutes or so. Welcome, Rameka and Megan.
Thank you.
And I'll start with you, Rameka. Tell us how you came to be doing what you're doing today. How was your passion and life experience led you to being a leader in community public housing?
Absolutely. So I actually grew up in public housing. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up there. My grandmother was in public housing. My mother then went into public housing, and that's just kind of how we grew up with that experience. Moved around a lot as a kid, and then ended up coming back here. We were, homeless a couple of times in there, and moved back into public housing, and then eventually I graduated high school and went off to college and stayed in a dorm and so on and so forth. But yeah, so public housing has kind of been my history, my childhood, what I grew up in. When I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to help people, and it took me a long time to find my path. And I started working on an idea for a nonprofit that I'm getting going now, CE3, Community Enrichment, Encouragement, and Empowerment. And it kind of just led me to where I am now, working at Chevy Chase Park Apartments, which, like you said, is a low-income housing community in a pretty suburban, I would say maybe middle-class, mid to upper-class neighborhood, and really just working with the residents to learn the housing side of things and to encourage people to grow past what society has said that you are capable of and what you can do. And that's how I met Megan, and she reached out to me about a plan that she was working on, and things have just kind of blossomed from there.
So Megan, great. How has your passion and your life experience led you to being a public school teacher and liaison?
Yeah, so my official role in the district is I work with English learners. So I do support services for those first and second generation immigrants that are still learning English. But I'm also a member of the district's diversity, equity, inclusion team. And so this is a team that was formed early last school year. And it was kind of a result of conversations that I think many districts have when they examine data and look at inequities that exist in terms of performance gaps and other data points in their districts, and to see the inequities that emerge from that when we're looking at different subgroups of students. So our assistant superintendent kind of gave a call to our staff. If someone had an idea, he would support, the efforts. So it kind of this team organically grew in response to that call. So there was a group of us that started a team to kind of audit our district from an equity lens and see what we could do. We honestly didn't know what we were doing, right? So we're all teachers in various roles, but we wanted to be responsive, to the needs we were seeing. And so personally, I have that personality that when I see inequities or injustice, I have an emotional response. And I've gotten myself into many mistakes because just responding and operating out of those emotions. So I will say that from my experiences, I've really benefited so much from Think Tank and the trainings. I participated in the COPE poverty simulation and various other trainings as well to help me learn to pause and listen and, to partner and collaborate. So I think a lot of those experiences and trainings kind of came out as we worked forward in this partnership.
Great. And before we get to this town hall that you developed this town hall you had, Rameka, representing low-income communities, and Megan, you representing a middle-class, upper-middle-class school. But I wanted to ask you first, Rameka, tell us about what obstacles you see in low-income families and what they're facing and how they're rising above those obstacles, your perspective.
Absolutely. So in my opinion and in my experience, the first or one of the biggest obstacles that we have is education, just lack of opportunity for education and lack of knowledge of what education can mean and do in the community. And that doesn't always just mean within the schools. That could mean the welfare system. That could mean, what is possible for you to be able to achieve in life. So just a lack of knowledge of possibility. And then outside of that, we have this kind of a psychological barrier to what we're capable of, right? So society has kind of placed this cap on us of what we're able to accomplish. And I know we've all heard the stereotypes, you're going to be a basketball player, you're going to be a football player, or you're going to stand on a corner and sell drugs. We all know these, ideas that society has about us. But I would pose that even before we get to those standards of what society has said that we can accomplish, our environment, our community has already set this limit for what we are able to accomplish. So we have to burst through this ceiling or these limits in our own minds of what we're able to accomplish before we can even get past what society has put on us of what we're able to accomplish. I see people every day working so hard to be successful. I see people every day working to avoid the cliff effect where you make too much to be successful but not enough to be independent of government help and assistance and subsidy. I see people every day trying to inspire themselves to be successful despite what society has placed on our shoulders to try to get around and get through. And there's just this tenacity that comes from low-income communities. And, people a lot of times think poverty and they think negative words, all these negative connotations. I'm in a group called Getting Ahead right now where we just did this poverty model. It's being taught by LeVar Glover through Miami Valley. And he had us, kind of do this model of poverty, talking about what does poverty look like, and we all came up with these terms and these words, and they were all negative. It was all fatherless, drug addiction, all these kind of words. And then he challenged us and he said, I didn't hear anything positive, and many of us have come from these communities. And I thought to myself, that is so true, because we are resourceful, we are resilient, we have tenacity, we have hope, we have power. And I see people every day using this to live, not just to burst through those ceilings that we talked about, but just to live and live full, positive, powerful, changing lives. And I know a lot of people hear low income and they hear poverty and they put their heads down, but it empowers me. And I'm proud to have come from a community where everybody thought that we wouldn't make it and we wouldn't be successful, and yet here we are making change.
Outstanding. Exactly. And Megan, your perspective from a suburban school district and advocating for families whose needs may be less visible in the community, what does it look like for schools to honor where children of all backgrounds are coming from, and to give them honor and dignity, and to look at each one not with looking at deficits or baggage or just stereotype, but looking at the gem that is themselves, this sacredness of each child, each individual.
That was powerful, Rameka. Thank you. So I think one thing that we've been talking about in the last year as educators is recognizing and owning that, we have a culture lens that we're bringing into our schools and into our teaching and our interactions with families. And so many times we look at ourselves as neutral, as strict. And so it's been a challenge, though, to look at ourselves and say that we're not neutral, that we have a way of interpreting behaviors and seeing things through our biases and through our prejudices, that we all, every single human brings a lens into what they do. And first step is owning that and recognizing that. So whatever those things are, whether they're the biases or just the way we see families play out, the way we see behaviors play out, all of these things have such an impact in our schools. And as teachers, we've got to own that lens and see that we have a lens. And when things, seem different or quote unquote strange to us, we've got to work to build those muscles and widen that aperture, to build our understanding, to get to really know our communities and our families, to honor them. I mean, to honor them is to know them and to understand and to be responsive to each other. So I know for us, a starting point has been looking inside, reflecting on who we are and what we're bringing to the table, that it isn't the only way to live, to play out, to carry out learning, and to do family, to all of these things. And then to have an openness to learning and being open, to those different interpretations. And to do that, you have to have those conversations, some hard conversations.
Yeah. So the hard conversations culminated. So you had this wonderful collision of certainly suburban teachers that have their own lens, as you said, and a community, low-income subsidized community close by, and that Rameka, you represent and lead, and you had this idea for a town hall that hopefully was going to be an opportunity for the hard conversation. So tell me how that happened. Go ahead.
So under our diversity team, we have several task forces, and we have a diversity plan with some goals that we've set. And one of those goals is community outreach and parent engagement. So there's a task force working under that goal. And again, we started out last school year, staff from various roles in our district coming together, just kind of spitballing ideas. Okay, so we've got some problems. We all have our own view of what's going on. And here we are within the walls of our school. We're inside the school coming up with strategies and ideas. And so, we were even pursuing different things let's try this. Let's try this thing or this thing. And then, after a month or so, somebody at the table was like, wait a second, do we even really know what the community needs? What are they saying? Are we even listening? So that question kind of came up, and then we're like, how could we listen? So we were thinking through, things we've tried in the past, surveys, using technology. And we started to realize and think through, we want to hear from people that maybe don't feel comfortable coming to us for whatever reason. And so, our heart kind of became, let's go to the community and let's listen. So somebody on our team ran over to Chevy Chase and encountered Rameka. And what we found there was a gatekeeper to a community.
A gatekeeper.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so I can't even honestly remember who came over initially.
One of our third grade teachers.
Yes. But I remember being so excited. I was very excited about it because I I had been kind of trying to figure out as well, how can we be change agents? How can we make a difference? And I realized that, you know, when you come from a background of poverty, you are not really comfortable with going outside of your community. And then I realized that that's not just about people in poverty. That's in general. In general, we stay in our comfort zones, but that's not how you learn people. That's not how you get to know people, and that's not how you affect change. And so I had, even in my own nonprofit, I realized that part of the goal, part of what we needed to do was insert ourselves in the middle of the community, to kind of take away that fear of going out and into the unknown. So when I was approached about the idea, I was very excited about it, and not really excited so much about representing the community, but giving our residents an opportunity to represent themselves and speak up for what was important to them. Because I'm not from Centerville, so I don't have the lived experience of living in that community, but I know the residents, and I know and when I speak with people, I try to make a connection, and I try to make sure that people understand that I'm listening and I care and I'm concerned. And so I knew that there's a problem that exists. And I took it and I said, you know what, if I get this opportunity, I have to go in and I have to be myself, and I have to not sugarcoat, and I have to be open and honest, and, you know, I have to be, you know, who I am, and represent. While I'm here representing my residents, I have to represent them to the best of my ability. And I was welcomed, and I was not, you know, I didn't leave feeling like, you know, I was ashamed or like I said too much or maybe I shouldn't have said this. I was welcomed, and my ideas and my comments were accepted, and I was very excited about the possibility for change, with the relationship between Chevy Chase or our apartment complex
and so they did listen to you.
They did.
And did Megan, did she sugarcoat anything?
No. So once we met Rameka and we were like, you know, we have this idea. She's like, all right, let's partner in this together. So I think within a week, she came over to one of our schools and sat at the table with us, with our team, and we're like, just lay it out there. And she did. She's like, okay, you're gonna hear some pain. You're gonna hear some stuff. And she was real with us. Like, it's been a long time coming.
So what do you remember?
She's right.
What was the pain? What was the pain?
That came out?
Yes.
Yeah, so with her guidance, we kind of made a strategy or a plan. And then we went there. I mean, as staff, we kind of we showed up. We were kind of obsolete. Like, we were just sitting, you know, in the crowd. Rameka was standing up front. So she kind of facilitated. We brought pizza, right? Yeah. I feel like that's all we did.
It's always helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there was some discomfort at first, but they, like, I say this before, but I feel like Rameka does a great job. She knows their hearts and their stories. Like, she knows each person who came in that room.
These are the residents.
Yeah, the residents. So, you know, she just started kind of opening the floor, you know, for people to come up, inviting them to come up. And she had a gentle way of coaxing. So there was a bit of a pause, right? Where everyone's like, is anything going to happen? But I think once one person has that courage to stand up. So, I mean, we had administrators. I don't know if the residents knew who was sitting in that room, but we did have administrators from central office. We had, you know, just teachers, just at various roles sitting in that crowd just to listen. And we, again, in our planning stage with Rameka, we were really committed that we're not there to respond. You know, we're there to listen and to let the residents be heard.
So this was not a town hall, but it wasn't a debate or anything like that. It was just a
town hall listening session.
So what was pulled out of that?
Oh my gosh, I think it was amazing. Like I said, when we went into the meeting, I went in knowing that I had to be raw and honest, because if we get one opportunity to say what's on our chest, then we can't hold back. And so before I even went to the meeting, I don't know if you know this, before I even went to the meeting, I made phone calls to my residents, that I knew were invested, who I knew had complaints, who I knew had opinions about the school district and the school. And I said, hey, this is happening. What do you think is the problem, and how do you think we can solve it? And I went in with notes, and I went in with, with quotes of what my residents had said to me, and I gave it to them raw.
And Megan, that's an excellent point. Megan, your perspective on was this a watershed moment for many of the administrators and teachers? Was this a humble moment?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think that was a night that none of us will forget. It was actually life-changing, really. It was so eye-opening. There were, and I won't share the specific stories because I think those belong to that night, but I think there were, again, going back to those lenses, there were specific things shared that, people in the room had seen from a different lens. And it was so eye-opening to see it from someone else's shoes. So observations within our hallways, with, again, with responses of the school to certain scenarios. Mm-hmm. And, you talked about intent. So many times, we talk a lot about intent versus impact. So, there are a lot of times where we, again, do things because they've worked for us or for what we're familiar with, and the intentions are good, but the impact can be bad. Mm-hmm. If there's not that understanding of the students and the families that you're working with, and the willingness to be responsive to them. Mm. And so, it was a very profound and powerful night. And it was quite an exercise to receive it without justifying, and even if you heard something that maybe you were involved in personally, and you think, man, I didn't mean it that way, but to receive it and hear the impact and let that be absorbed, because that's reality. It doesn't matter what we intended. We have to hear what the impact is and shift, because it's our job to create a space where all our students thrive and all our students belong. And so if that's not coming across, we can't defend what our intention was. We have to regroup and go at it a different way.
And I can't tell you how much that meant to the parents, to the residents who were in the room, because they were able to tell their truth and then not have to combat it, not have to defend themselves, not have to argue it, because the teachers and staff that came were willing to receive and reflect and not argue back. That event, that town hall, really showed our residents that this is not how things are going to be forever. There's room for change, and there's now an avenue for change, and you did that for them. And but you did that for our residents, for those who showed up and who were present, and they took that back to their homes, and they took that back to their neighbors, and it created this wave where now we're no longer thinking we don't matter. We're no longer thinking there's nobody that cares. We know that there are people who care and who are willing to listen and be receptive and not be combative about it.
So there was some humility, there was some pain, but everyone was elevated by all of that. And there was probably forgiveness and restoration, and probably some hugs. So
that was right before we had to quit hugging.
I see.
It happened right before the quarantine, so we could still do that.
So the town hall.
Be together.
So the town hall seems to be. This is going to be built into the DNA of the community, of both your communities, to become a greater oneness of the community. Now, but beyond the town hall, I was talking to you guys yesterday, and on a personal note, and Rameka, you said, and when I asked you both your thoughts on this, I asked you, Rameka, you said, if we could just only talk about race at a younger age, and you gave your perspective, and Megan, you have also a real life perspective as well, and I wanted you to share that, but you first, Rameka.
Yeah. So, of course, not of course, because I guess people can't see me, but I'm African American. And I grew up in an African American family. But my mom is, she's very mixed, but she's very, very fair skinned, and she doesn't have the kinky hair and so on and so forth. And so I grew up in this area where, this is where we're from. And we didn't have conversations about race. It was just what it was. There, we were separate. We grew up separately. We saw each other. I saw people of other races, but there were no conversations. I didn't, like I shared with you guys yesterday, I didn't have my first real conversation about race until I was a freshman in college, and I could not for the life of me figure out why there was so much hair in the showers. And then I found out that the white girls that I lived with in the dorm and had lived with for months at that point literally washed their hair every day. And I could not understand it. Because no, I couldn't imagine washing my hair every day. It would take me hours a day to get my hair straight again. But that was the first time that we all kind of sat down and just this really organic powwow. And it morphed into so much and morphed into all these conversations about just cultural differences. And I said, you know what? At that time, I was 19 years old. And I was like, what if I had had this conversation with, my friends when I was 7 or 6?
Would that have impact on you?
Yeah. What kind of impact would that have had? Because without going too much into my personal story, I've experienced a lot of what we're going through today. When I was 5 or so, very much like what happened with George Floyd, my father was stopped walking down the street doing absolutely nothing because he looked like somebody who might have done something somewhere. And he was, I don't want to say attacked, but, by 4 different officers. And at this point, I'm maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I'll never forget watching them throw him on the ground and slamming him and putting their knee in his back. And his head is literally up under the back of a car. There are 3 officers standing around him and one with their hand on their gun yelling at him, Mm-hmm. And so that was my experience. That was what I knew about race. Can you imagine if I had been able to sit down with people who did not look like me and have the conversation? What it would have changed about my perception about white people, about officers, about people of different races. That would have changed my entire mindset. And thankfully, I had my mother and my grandmother there to help to shape my view and to plug in some of the realities of what was happening. But there aren't those people in every family. And so having these conversations sooner and not treating them like untouchable topics could really change the way that we perceive each other.
Good word. And Megan, your thoughts on your personal experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, it may be, so I am a white woman, and maybe similar to what you started to say, Rameka, about not having those conversations. I think we are products of, the early 90s and the colorblind generation, where, I mean, that was kind of the theme of the day, right?
Yep.
Like, that's how I was raised, that we don't see differences. We don't see color. We're all human. We're all so true.
Yeah.
We're all equal. So we don't talk about that. And I think that's what lent to that fear. If we talk about that, if we acknowledge differences, then, we're going to go into racism. So we're going to push that all aside. So, I think that now we're questioning that, and we're recognizing the damage. To not seeing ourselves and our differences and celebrating them and then talking about them. But there is such fear. And, lately in our district, we've been doing some book studies and reading books about race. Like we did over the summer, we had a series of discussions around a book called Courageous Conversations About Race was the book we were talking through. And you had a format for talking through race. And, I mean, it's a real struggle for white people to sit at a table and talk about race. And we find that, we just feel ill-equipped, and and personally, I was just reflecting, and this is always on my mind as I think about my past and being able to navigate conversations about race. But growing up, I had a really close friend. My best friend was Black, and she lived across the street from me. And, we were just best buds, running across a busy street all the time to see each other. Our parents were always trying to, hold us back. And it wasn't until much, much later on into our adulthood that she came back and confronted me on some of the things that I had said as a child to her, and other things maybe she experienced, just around my family and in the community. But some of the things she brought up that were said as children, I just so wish that an adult had heard those things said, those teasings or whatever, and had been able to constructively lead us to, how we talk about differences, how we celebrate, and what we don't say, And so, it's a great shame and regret in my life that I didn't have someone older walk alongside me. And I think that we got to do better, for our kids.
I don't want you to take that on yourself, Megan, because you shouldn't regret that. It wasn't your responsibility. You were a child. It was somebody's, all of our parents, honestly, on some level, with this whole colorblind generation, like you were talking about, not seeing my color does not mean that racism doesn't exist anymore. It just means that you are choosing to ignore my story and my history and my path. Mm-hmm. And so I was listening to a podcast earlier and they were saying that not being racist is not enough. It's time to be anti-racist. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to get into that and to start talking about not just not feeding into it, but fighting against it. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing in these schools and what you guys are doing with this diversity and equity team is really working towards fighting all these stereotypes and everything that's been kind of pushed on us from generation to generation. And you are doing your part. You're doing what needs to be done to stop this from happening and stopping it from continuing to be a problem. We can't change the past, but we can affect the future. And that's what you're doing. And it's very, very much appreciated. Very much so.
Okay. And you guys are a dynamic duo, and you've been changed for life, my guess, on that serendipitous event and relation and occasion. And I think you might have just started a movement because I might imagine there's school districts all over the country who could have experienced what you guys generated together by just being in proximity, being in proximity, now being in friendship, and then in friendship, great things happen, and great things, and eyes open, and there's new lenses, and there's new hearts, and there's forgiveness, and there's redemption, and so not being racist is not enough. Rameka, thanks for being here. Absolutely. Megan, thanks for being here on another Think Tank podcast. This has been the Rethink Community Podcast, brought to you by Think Tank, Inc., with music by Elijah Hamilton. Don't forget to subscribe to hear upcoming episodes featuring the stories of other courageous individuals we think you should know. And if you're part of an organization that would like to be better equipped to serve people in poverty, be sure to check out the resources we offer, including the Cost of Poverty Experience, or COPE, at thinktank-inc.org/COPE. Join the hundreds of businesses, schools, colleges, churches, and healthcare providers that have used the Cost of Poverty Experience, along with our other suite of tools and coaching to find new ways of thinking and responding to poverty.